All right, should we get started? It's about 3:05. I
Yes.
see a lot of familiar faces here, which are not faces, but some of faces that I know from other places, which is great. All right, so
1 second. This is from the Crazy Obsessed Plant Group who is recording. Somebody just asked that question, so I figured I'd answer it. Right now, our guest speaker is Dr. Grant Godden, who's a biological scientist at Florida Museum at the University of Florida. His research combines field botany with recent advances in genomics and computational biology to reconstruct the evolutionary histories of plants. He's got a bio on our plant group. I'm not going to read it all. It's very interesting, and that's not why I'm reading it. I don't have my glasses, so I can't see it very well. So I will let Grant take over now, and welcome, Grant. Thank you very much for joining us today.
sure, thanks for inviting me. So let me see if I can share my screen quickly. Okay. So everyone should be able to see my screen now, correct?
I can see it, yes.
Okay, great. So it's really an honor to have been invited to do this. I was telling Kay before everyone joined in that normally I speak on subjects that are related to genetics or botany. And I don't get to talk a lot about growing plants, which is something that I do for fun and that I really enjoy. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about growing Sinningia. This is a really great group of plants, which I'll tell you a lot more about, and also about, in general, growing plants indoors and under lights, which is something I've had to do for the majority of my adult life. So if I can get my slides to advance. So the talk format is going to be pretty informal today. I'm going to break this up into a few things to tell you a little bit of background about how I started to grow plants indoors and how that quickly got out of control. And then we're going to delve into a little bit of science to sort of talk about the things that you need to think about when you're growing plants indoors and under lights, and the requirements for that. And then I'll transition to talking a little bit more about gesneriads, particularly Sinningia, which is something that I grow the most of, how to make those grow, and some challenges that you might experience as your collection grows larger. And then in the end, I think you'll realize that I'm completely crazy about plants, which is why I'm part of this group to begin with. And this is one of my favorite cartoons, which I really think describes what's happened in my life. It began quite harmlessly with a plant on the windowsill, and the next thing you know, you have a jungle. So I'm kind of notorious for this, and I really love that cartoon. So why do we grow indoors or under lights? There are a lot of reasons for this. You might live in a temporary living situation, which is only for a short time and you have to move. You might have a rental property. In those places, you might not have enough light for growing plants or space for outdoor gardening, but you really like plants, so you want to grow them anyway. Depending on where you live in the country, I know there are a lot of folks up north. Of course, I'm here in Florida. In some of those places, you have a short growing season, which means you really can't grow and enjoy plants all year long unless you grow them indoors. Also, some of the types of plants that you might grow, you might not live in the correct climate for. So a lot of houseplants, for instance, are from the tropics. So to grow them well for the year round, especially, you need to grow them indoors. You might also have plants that are challenging in terms of their requirements for day length. Or you might have problems with pests outside. So I live in Florida, we have tons of bugs. They will be all over my plants every week if I don't do something about it. So growing plants inside means that I can grow perfect looking plants, which I think is the wonderful thing about horticulture. We can really see what plants can do and see them in their perfection. And lastly, you can grow plants indoors because you can. So why not? So I wanted to talk a little bit about my background and how I started growing plants indoors. And so, you know, over the course of the years, since I was an undergraduate and I studied botany at Michigan State University, I've moved probably 30 times over the years. And so I've lived in a lot of temporary living situations. I've moved across the country back and forth multiple times, including New York City, Florida, Los Angeles. And so I've often had to travel with my plants. In fact, it was kind of funny on the most recent trip to Florida when I came back for my current position. I had a person in the hotel, one of the maids actually in the hotel asked me, do you always travel with plants? Because I'm pushing them on this little cart, right? And I had to stop and I looked at her and I said, yes. And I continued pushing my cart. So I often do travel with plants. So I grow a lot of plants in pots or things that can be transported easily. So a lot of orchids and now gesneriads. And also I have some cacti and succulent collections. So I've lived in all kinds of different living environments, including East Village apartments that are quite small, where you have to grow plants on the windowsill and you probably have a tall building next to you or directly across the courtyard from you. So you don't get a lot of light to grow plants. Since I came to Florida, I've rented numerous houses where I actually can grow plants on the windowsills, but because I have a lot of specialty plants, I still grow under lights. And so, of course, my view of how to grow plants is greatly influenced by my background as a plant biologist and as a botanist, where we often grow plants in chambers for research, which is very, very controlled with lights and humidity control and temperature control, and even the amount of gases like carbon dioxide can be controlled in these environments. So they're very, very specific, but also very expensive and impractical for growing indoors. So one of my first purchases when I lived in New York City was something called an orchidarium. And if any of you have grown orchids, you've probably heard of this before. They were quite expensive. I think this unit cost maybe $3,000, which, you know, for a recent college grad is a lot of money. So I was very lucky to find one on eBay for $500, miscategorized, so I didn't have any competition buying it. But I had to pay $600 to ship it from California to New York City. Still a lot of money for me at the time, but I've had this unit for more than 20 years. And it's still beautiful, and it's a great little chamber to grow plants in. And that's where I really got my start growing plants indoors under lights. And I learned a lot about controlling those kind of environments. So here you can see I have a bunch of orchids that I'm growing here in this chamber, and they do quite well. So it wasn't until I moved to Michigan and I bought my first house that I could have an outdoor garden. And this is the first garden that I ever created on my own. It was very exciting. But of course, most of the year looks like this. So naturally, I had to grow plants indoors under lights still. And living in the Midwest was great because you often have a basement and you can grow plants really well in basements under lights because the temperature is a little bit cooler. So I have flowers year round in my house. But you can't grow plants just anywhere in your house. And there are some things that you need to do this properly. If we could grow them anywhere, probably our kitchen tables would look like this for many plant obsessed people. And in fact, this is my kitchen table. But I'm not growing plants there. My friend was visiting and we had to bring the plants inside because it was cold out. Anyways, there are some things that you really need to think about. Of course, most people know that water and fertilizer are needed for plants, and oftentimes this is how they kill their plants, by overdoing it or underdoing it. But light is really important, and light is not created equal. So we're going to talk more about that in a second. Also, I'm sorry if my dogs bark. I see the FedEx man walking up to the door. So also humidity, air movement, and temperature are extremely important. Indoors, our houses tend to be a little bit dry, although the temperature for most houseplants is going to be in the 70s, which is about the temperature that we keep our houses. When you have light, when you're growing plants under lights, the temperature often increases by 10 degrees. And this can become a problem quickly because you can actually dry out your plants faster, meaning you have to water more, etc. And then lastly, you know, if you have humidity that's too high or too low, you might get browning edges of your leaves. You can get mold problems on your plants, such as botrytis, which is growing on this begonia. And that's also a problem. You don't want plant diseases. But your space and equipment can pretty much be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So for example, you don't have to buy a $3,000 orchidarium or a $700 or $800 light stand for your plants. Sorry, I'm gonna shut my door. So you can actually build your own shelves very easily out of a utility shelf that you can buy at any big box store and put shop lights on that. Or you could build your own case. So this is, for example, a case that one of my friends here in Gainesville built for his orchids. You can also build even more simple structures just by suspending a light fixture over a table or something where you grow plants. And then also other simple containers that you might be able to use. Okay, so here is an example of some terrariums that I started to make, just picking up bits of moss and sticks and bones and other things that I would find out and around the area where I lived when I would walk my dogs. And I would bring them back to my office and enjoy them. And if you want to see some really cool terrariums, I encourage you to visit. I have a friend now who I met through Instagram who runs this really great shop called Doodlebird Terrariums. And she can build the most amazing vivariums. You can actually see a Sinningia here, which I sold her on eBay a long time ago, growing inside of her vivarium. So the first person to kind of experiment with growing plants under lights was Andrei Faminstin. I can't say his name correctly, but he was a Russian botanist who grew these plants under artificial lights in 1868. And today we've learned a great deal about the science behind growing under lights, and you can read very in-depth information about that. In fact, I think in this group right now, there is a person who regularly gives talks on this topic. But the important thing to know is that not all lights are created equal. So plants themselves, as you can see here on the right, really take advantage of a short range of available light compared to what daylight emits from the sun. And there are two sort of areas of spectra that are particularly important for plants, blue light range and this red light range, and they affect how the plants grow differently. So blue light being really important for vegetative growth. If you have lights that are really strong in a blue light spectrum, it actually can affect the length of the internodes. And my lights that I use here at home actually have a pretty strong blue spectrum. And I think that's why some of my Sinningias appear to be more compact than what I see other people posting. And I really like that actually, because I think that the compactness of my plants actually makes them cuter in a way. So that's kind of an advantage. If you know a lot about the spectrum of lights and how they affect plants, you can really use that to your advantage. But in order to meet a plant's basic needs, you really need to pay attention to this. So if you look over here on the left, you can see that different colors or warmness of lights can affect the spectrum that they put out. So a cool white LED light, for instance, has a huge blue peak, but a warm white LED light almost has none. So sometimes you need to combine the types of lights that you use, or you can choose a light that has a more broader spectrum that mimics daylight, and you'll get the best results from that. So there are lots of grow lights online. A lot of them have a lot of scientific information with them, and they tend to look like blue, pink, and purple in color, or red. Those are okay. A lot of people use them and use them well. They use them in horticulture all the time. One thing I don't like about them is they affect the way that we see plants, right? Because it doesn't really reflect what natural light looks like. So I actually don't like to use those. A lot of people traditionally have used fluorescent lights, or a combination of fluorescent and incandescent light fixtures. And more recently, we've had a lot of movement or transition to LED lights, which are really cheap to run. And also both of these types of light fixtures are effective for growing plants. The things to pay attention to when you're shopping around for lights is what spectra they actually produce, how much light intensity they have. So some shop lights, for instance, are extremely bright. It will be uncomfortable for you because they will be so bright, and they could burn your plants. So you need to kind of pay attention to that. The distance you have between your lights and the plants. Also, you need to think about how much light intensity is being put out. But these are all great because you can raise and lower them to accommodate the intensity and of the light with the plant height or that you have to get the best results. So if you're looking for LED lights, which I do recommend because they don't put out much heat, look for the ones with full spectra. And if you're doing fluorescent, consider a combination of cool and warm tubes, which will give you more balanced light. So sometimes they say that you want to choose one over the other, depending on whether you want your plants to grow rapidly or whether you want them to flower. I tend to use a combination of the two, which gives a really balanced light, and my plants grow fine and they also flower. So just if you're going to use fluorescent lights, beware that the heat will raise about 10 degrees in the environment. And also, if you use LED lights and you have a lot of them, like I do, your room will also get a little bit warmer, and you may need to do something to control that.
Grant,
so one of the,
could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Concerning the LED lights, now I had read that the lumens, you would want to get at least 5,000 lumens. Is that correct?
I think that sounds about right. I actually have lights that are 7,000 lumens, and gesneriad people freak out about this because they're like, oh my gosh, you'll burn the plants. And I think that's true, actually. You will burn the plants if you don't have the correct height. So if your plants are too close to those lights, it's going to be way too bright for them. They're probably going to turn red or even get crispy or wilt. And one of the symptoms that you'll often see is curling leaves, and that's not a good thing. And that can be caused by too bright of light intensity. So one of the things that I do to sort of play around with that is I pretend like I have a greenhouse. What do you do in a greenhouse when the light is too strong during the summer? You either put some kind of screening over, which, window screens, for instance, reduce the amount of light that comes through your window by, up to like 60%, right? So I sometimes use magnets and I connect window screen to my light fixtures over plants that require less light. So I have a few African violets, for instance. I grow them under the same lights, but I use some window screen to make the light intensity less. And they do just fine. They actually do very well. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
so distance really matters. So some common mistakes that people do is they place their plants too far away from lights. I've even had people ask whether they could use a table lamp, right? So the light really needs to be shining down from above, just like it would be outside. If you use a table lamp, the light is not going to go in the right direction. Your plant is going to lean towards the light, which won't make for a very attractive plant. Too close, you can burn, or you can get curled leaves. Too far away, they reach, and you get weak growth, and oftentimes your plants won't flower. So there are lots of recommendations about distance, and I think the reason for that is because the light fixtures themselves differ a lot. But in average, I would say 8 to 16 inches is probably a good place to start. So you probably want to start a little bit farther away before you, and test things out before you put all your plants under a light and you ruin them. So if you're switching to a light system from like growing on windowsills, which I think is a great idea, just be careful about how you do that. So day length also matters. So one of the most important things for plants, obviously, is to do photosynthesis. And they basically use carbon dioxide and water and use light energy to convert that into sugars. But in order to take advantage of those sugars and turn them into energy that the plant can use for growth, it requires darkness. That reaction occurs at night. So having the right balance of day and nighttime hours is really important for plants. So we have something in botany called photoperiodism. This is basically the reaction of plants to lengths of daylight and darkness. And a lot of plants, not all, but a lot of plants use this to know when it's time to grow, when it's time to reproduce or flower. And so that can be really important in getting your plants to flower. In the tropics, you can see in this figure right here, depending on the season and whether you're in the northern or the southern hemispheres, the day length can be different. So in the tropics, it's exactly 12 hours. At 7 o'clock in the morning, it's light at almost instantaneously, and the same at 7 p.m. So if you're out in the forest, you better have a flashlight with you because you're going to find yourself in the dark very quickly. It's not a gradual process like you have in the northern, like in the Northeast, where a lot of you live. So, using a timer is really important. I think a lot of tropical plants and indoor plants usually like about 14 hours of light. And sometimes I will increase that to 16 hours, like for some of my orchids, for instance, during one of the seasons, and that triggers them to flower. Use a timer. I really advise you to use a timer. Also, you should know a little bit about where your plants come from, right? Our job as plant growers is to recreate the environments where our plants live. Do they occur in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere? Are they in the tropics or the temperate zone? Do they grow in open habitats or tropical forest? A lot of house plants grow in the tropics. And they have very different requirements based on where you would find them. So are they growing in wet forests where they have very high humidity and a lot of rainfall, and very rich soils? Or are they growing in the trees, like a lot of orchids or bromeliads, for instance, grow in the tree tops where the light intensity can be quite bright? So they need very bright light, very well draining media, like bark, for instance, and they need high humidity. Their temperatures can vary considerably depending on whether or not they grow up here high in the mountains, where in the clouds, where the temperatures are cooler in the lower 70s or even below that at night. But with very high humidity. Those conditions are kind of hard to recreate, and knowing something about your plants can actually help you get that right. Also, as I mentioned before, like if you think of poinsettias, for instance, they respond to photoperiod. So your plants will not bloom unless you change the light hours accordingly. So how much to water and when? This question I get a lot as a botanist, even though I'm not a horticulturist, I'm a botanist, but a lot of people are like, oh, you know about gardening, you know about plants, like how much should I water this? Well, that really depends. It depends on what your plant actually needs. It depends on what season we're in and how many hours of daylight there is, because when the lights are on, the plants are often transpiring and they're losing water. And the warmer it is and the drier it is, the more water they lose, which means you need to water more often. So my best advice, if you're growing plants indoors, is to keep plants in the 70s. Because if you have lights, like in my orchidarium, for instance, I struggled when I wasn't using my orchidarium in the basement. The temperatures in my orchidarium would go up to 85 degrees or higher during the day, which is actually very bad because it's a tipping point for many plants. So at 85 degrees and higher, the plant is actually expending more energy than it's making. And so the plant is losing, it's getting ill. So you need to do whatever you can to decrease the temperature. So keep it in the 70s if you can. And a lot of plants enjoy humidity at about 50%. That's, I think, true of most gesneriads, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you can use things like humidity trays, ultrasonic foggers. You can use enclosures. So like right here is an example of a tray that I use, which comes, you can buy these greenhouse domes. This is called a permanest tray. And you can see I actually make these grids out of egg crate, which is a covering for lighting fixtures, fluorescent lighting fixtures. You can buy it at a big box store. And I can actually break this stuff apart with pliers. So I don't actually need any saws or anything. And what I like about this, I can talk about this now because then I won't have to come back to it. What I like about this is I actually can lift, if I have my plants sitting on here, I can actually lift out this tray at the whole time and switch to a new tray with clean water. And I don't have to worry about, fussing with the plants too much. I can leave them exactly where they are and put them back on this thing. So I like these. You can also use these kind of trays and put soil in them. We use them in science all the time. They can be kind of pricey. I don't remember the exact cost. Obviously, if you buy more, you can get them cheaper, but they're probably about $5 a piece, I'm guessing. So depending on how many plants you have, if you have a small number of plants, this is totally feasible for you to invest in something like this. And this is super hard plastic, so it's really durable. And it has vents in the top too, so you can open and close them to allow as much or humidity as you want, or to let them dry out a little bit and have better air circulation. All right, so one of the things I'm going to talk about later is wick watering. I think a lot of horticulturists will tell you that this is actually not the easiest technique in the world to get right. It is a little bit tricky at first, but if you know what you're doing, it's not that bad. And actually, this is my lifesaver because I am a scientist and I don't have time to water my plants all day, every weekend, right? So using wick watering, actually, I don't have to worry about them. The plants take up as much water as they want, and everybody's happy. So the last thing, make sure you keep air flowing, right? You don't have good airflow, you get fungi and bacteria growing, they will kill your plants. This is very bad. So how to prevent pests and pathogens. This is something that you need to think about when you're growing plants inside. This is a double-edged sword, really, because if you grow plants inside, they're not as exposed to the pests that you might have outside, right? So that's an advantage. But you do have to be a little bit careful because if insects get in your house, they're hard to get rid of. So I really strongly advise you to quarantine and observe all plants that you bring home. Don't put them in the same room as your regular plant collections, keep them aside, watch them, examine them carefully. A lot of plants that you get from nurseries that are grown in greenhouses are full of bugs like thrips, mealybugs, spider mites, which you really don't want in your house because they love dry conditions like houses have, and they will wreak havoc on your plants and they're hard to get rid of. Also, be careful about traveling. So every plant researcher knows that you don't go from a greenhouse to a growth chamber, for instance, right? You don't go from working outside with your plants to coming inside and working with your indoor plants, because guess what? Thrips and other bugs hitchhike on your clothes and they will get on your plants, and before you know it, they will be eating them. And also watch out for your pets because they also bring in a lot of bugs. So in my house, I actually have a separate room where I grow most of my plants. And then of course I have windowsill plants. A lot of people do. And I don't worry about those as much, but where I have a lot of plants, I worry about this a lot. And beware of open windows because thrips can actually go through window screens. And I have had this happen, I am ashamed to say, and I've had to treat them. It was a huge problem for me late last year, and I had to basically harvest 100% of my plants to make it go away, which was a lot of work. So make sure that you are aware of insects that you can get in. Also use a thermohygrometer. This is just a fancy word for a thermostat, which also measures the humidity. And you should get one that will show you the low and high temperatures as well as the low and high humidities because those change throughout the day. And this will help you see. There are actually, so that one I'm showing here, I think maybe costs less than $20. You can get some more sophisticated ones that are smart that actually log these things for you and can report it to your phone so you can see the graph from day to day or month to month, which is actually really handy the more sophisticated you want to get in your growing conditions. Make sure that you provide good ventilation. I already mentioned that. So you can get clip fans, you can use box fans, blow them gently. If your plants are waving a little bit in the air, that's actually a good thing. But also beware that it can dry out your environment and you don't want that. So you should also keep a really clean environment if you have a lot of plants under lights. You know, washing if you have a tile floor like I do in my plant room, I mop it, you know, every week and a half or so with Lysol and a little bit of bleach to sterilize the floor. This is a good thing to do. And also you need to keep your plants clean as well. So keep them trimmed. Don't let flowers and stuff drop and sit there, or you'll end up, or you could end up with mold in your environment, which is not a good thing. You can also use some systemics if you're okay with that. So I'll mention this again later, but when I'm potting my plants, I sometimes use bonite crystals or granules, and I put those in the top portion of the soil when I plant my tubers, and I don't really have to worry about insects eating my plants for a while. Other things that you can use if you get mold on your plants, you can use Lysol. Have you ever sprayed your plants with Lysol before? This stuff is amazing. Just mist it over your plants like you're spraying the room, and it will kill the mold on your plants, including powdery mildew, which is a problem for some of you guys, even outside. The other thing that's really great is hydrogen peroxide. You can use hydrogen peroxide mixed with a little dish soap and vinegar, for instance, and you can spray that on your plants. This is also really great for treating mold problems. Even if you get like a white cottony mold on the surface of your soil, which doesn't technically harm the plants, but it isn't great for maybe you to breathe, you can use this. You can spray, you can actually water your plants with this directly, and it's amazing because it will bubble up in the pots. And that's basically, you know, this just gets converted to oxygen at the roots, and it's actually good for plants in a way. And it can kill all the bacteria and fungi that might be in the soil that's making your soil stinky or
Grant?
gross. Yes.
You don't have to water it down, just straight hydrogen peroxide.
You can water it down. I don't. It's okay. Only 3%, and I've never had it damage a plant ever. So okay. Yeah, later when I talk about using it in a reservoir, I actually do dilute it. But I actually don't water down my hydrogen peroxide when I treat plants this way. And
another thing, I'm sorry to bring this up, but are you watching The Waiting Room?
I am not, actually.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's really bad.
All right, thank you.
I don't even know how I can see that when I'm in presentation mode.
It should, I would think it would pop up on the top if anybody's there. So, all right, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, so now I'm going to transition, and I have spent a lot of time talking because I can tend to ramble on about it.
Grant, you have muted yourself.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me. So Gesneriaceae is a really great family of plants. The ending ACE is the botanical term meaning family. So this is the gesneriad family. And some people you might hear say gesneriad, some people say gesneriad. I think technically gesneriad is correct because the person's name was Gesner, that it's named after, I believe. But either one is fine, and you will hear people say both. There are about 152 genera of plants in this group and over 3,000 species. They mostly occur in the New and Old World tropics. And when it comes to characters, a lot of people ask me, like, how do I know that this plant is a gesneriad? Oh gosh. I actually had to look that up today, and this is literally my response to that, eek. Because in reality, there aren't a lot of characters that actually define what a gesneriad is that are distinct from other plants that are in the same group, which is called Lamiaceae, the order that includes mints and acanths and a lot of other plants that you use in gardens. Those plants typically have opposite leaves that are also decussate, meaning that each pair of leaves rotate 90 degrees on the stem. It's not always true, but for the most part, that's a major character of the group. They also have 5 petals, often in what is called a bilabiate flower. So you would have an upper lip and a lower lip, the upper lip having 2 petals, the lower lip having 3 petals. They can be tubular in shape, and sometimes they're opened up into what we call an actinomorphic or a radially symmetrical flower. But some common things that gesneriads actually have are things that you really can't see as a layman, or even I can't see as a botanist. So like they have some chemical compounds in common. They do often have capsule fruits with dust-like seeds, and they share some common base chromosome numbers. So not really useful to the average person, but once you get used to looking at these plants, you will recognize them as a gesneriad right away. So there are many familiar houseplants in this group. Probably everyone knows someone who has had an African violet at one point or another that's in this family. Flores gloxinias used to be very popular in the US, probably in the 40s. I could be wrong on that, but before my time. And now they're still very popular in Eastern Europe. So a lot of Eastern Europeans are looking for these. They're kind of rare here. Streptocarpus or Cape primroses are really common. And then goldfish plant, some of you might have heard of that before, Nematanthus. But there are actually a lot of really cool genera that you may see in nurseries or specialty plant shops, particularly this one, Streptocarpella. Blue Concord is a plant you might see at Lowe's or another nursery. They form these really beautiful balls with blue flowers that cascade out in every direction. Petrocosmias are loved for their spirally kind of arranged leaves that are very compact. They're really beautiful. Columneas, what else? Primulinas, epichyas, which have all different colored leaves, including like pinks and reds. Those are really spectacular. But some of the horticultural features of these plants which make them great is that there are species with tubers and rhizomes. Actually, even as a botanist, I had to go back and kind of remind myself what the difference between rhizomes and tubers are, because they both come from stem tissue. So a tuber tends to be kind of an amorphous blob. There isn't really something that really defines what its shape is, and it has some other botanical properties to it too, but I think most people recognize a potato. And this is basically what this is. It's a tiny potato, and it has eyes that grow into shoots, and it forms new plants. Some of the other gesneriads, including some of the Sinningias, or formerly Sinningias, they have rhizomes or scaly rhizomes, and those are usually formed in a horizontal position underground. And the sprout will actually sprout right out of the end of this. And this makes these really easy to store and to share, and also a little bit robust to problems you might have. So if you accidentally forgot to water your plant and it died, chances are it will grow again from your tuber, which is great. You can propagate gesneriads in a lot of different ways. They're actually pretty easy to propagate. You can actually clip off the top of the plant and just leave a few leaves and basically stick that directly in the soil. If you use some rooting compound, you can get them to grow even faster. With African violets, you can break off their leaves and actually stick the leaf in the soil, and it will form a new little plantlet, usually 2 of them. With some Sinningias, like Speciosa Sinningias, and with Streptocarpus, you can actually cut the leaves, and at the veins, basically, you will get lots of little plantlets forming. So you can make lots of plants to share with your friends. And I will also add that these leaves are pretty tough. So you can actually send them through the mail to your friends. Just cut off a leaf of your plant, send it to your friends, and they can propagate them where they live, which is really great. For Sinningias, you can divide their tubers with a knife. You can cut them up. As long as they have a growing eye on them. A tuber that does not have an eye is called a blind tuber, by the way. So if you used a Sinningia leaf to try to grow a tuber, like by breaking off a leaf and sticking in the soil, it will grow a tuber, but it will be blind and it will never produce a plant. So some of the ways that we do that instead is you can either divide the tuber if it has multiple nodes, and so each like half, for instance, would have a node, it will grow a plant that way. You just have to make sure you let this dry out so it doesn't rot and form a callus, what we call a callus, which is kind of like a scab. And then you can also use stem propagation. So you can actually, so crown cuttings are kind of stem propagation in a way. Basically, the nodes that are under the level of the soil are going to swell and produce the tuber, and you will get new plants growing from there. But so as long as you have at least one node, this cutting actually should form a plant. And then obviously you can grow things from seed. So all of these reasons actually make these plants quite affordable because they're pretty easy to propagate. So let's talk about Sinningias, and I am going to have to go a little bit faster because I'm running behind. So Sinningia actually is named for a gardener at the Bonn Botanical Garden, the University Botanical Garden, named Wilhelm Sinning. I'm not sure if it's Sinning or Sinninge, but because most people pronounce this genus Sinningia. But anyways, it's named after him, and it's named for, in botany, we have something called a type species, which is a plant that's found in nature that we use. So it's an actual specimen, one individual specimen that we compare all other plants to. So the type of Sinningia is Sinningia helleri, and this is what it looks like. It comes from Brazil. It's a very showy species. But there are about 65 species overall. All of them occur in Central and South America, and the highest diversity actually occurs in Brazil. And I point out here that Gloxinia, which is another name you might hear for Sinningias, they used to be combined together, and research has split them apart. Gloxinias are distinguished from Sinningias in that they have scaly rhizomes. They don't have tubers. So here you can see a couple of Sinningias where they occur in the wild. They can occur in quite different habitats. Here's one growing on the side of a cliff in kind of a shady environment. That's Sinningia ballata, and we have Sinningia agensis here growing on what looks to be a rock outcrop, probably at high elevation in Brazil. So, knowing something about where your plants come from, again, can help you grow them better. So I'm going to show you some pictures just for fun of some of the Sinningia species that I grow. This is Cardinalis, probably a hummingbird pollinated species, and Leucotricha. They have very hairy leaves and they form huge tubers that rise above the level of the soil and often have a lot of stems going out at different angles. This is Ambiensis, which has very sticky leaves, but the flowers are really cute. It is a really adorable plant, which oftentimes species are not quite as showy as what we can make in horticulture, but I think this one is really lovely. Also, Sinningia conspicua, which is a parent of a lot of plant hybrids that I'll show you, is a fragrant species. It smells like lemons. It's really delightful. It can grow pretty large. There's also Sinningia richii. This one's Robson Lopez, which is a yellow form. So yellow is kind of a rare color in Sinningia. So a lot of yellow Sinningia hybrids that we have, among the few that we have, they actually come from these parents. Henii is a relatively recently described species, but you can see it has a different floral form that's kind of saccate in shape, which makes it kind of interesting to look at. It doesn't have a fragrance that I've noticed. This is Bragii, which has a rose-like fragrance. And this one I heard, this just flowered for me like within the last couple of weeks for the first time. And I didn't think it was particularly hard to grow, but a lot of people say it's difficult to flower. I think it requires super bright light, which I have. So it's a really nice species. It has really beautiful, deep purple flowers. In this photo, it's hard to photograph because the color is so deep. Gutata smells like honey, has these beautiful shiny leaves, as do these eumorphas. They also have really pretty leaves. And there are at least 3 or 4 forms of this that are different colors. And then this is a really freaky alien plant. This is called Sinningia brasiliensis. It's actually a bat-pollinated species. And it's very strongly fragrant. It smells so one of the people in our gesneriad group describes it as toffee cookies. I personally don't care for it too much. It smells kind of chemical-like to me, and it's very, very strong, but it's fragrant at night, of course, because it's signaling to bats, hey, here I am, come and see me. I've got nectar for you. So it actually drips sometimes nectar because it produces so much. But it is a really cool species to grow. I wish I would have put a picture of one of the buds in here, because even when the buds are coming out, it looks like this weird alien insect. It's kind of exciting to watch it develop. And then, of course, we have a lot of micro species. These are the tiniest of the Sinningias. I think I'm missing one picture of them, but Consina is one that was discovered. I don't remember exactly, but I don't think people know where this occurs in the wild anymore. It's thought maybe that it's extinct, which is kind of sad. But it is commonly used to produce very small Sinningia hybrids. There's Minima, which has a mandatory dormant period. So it actually will grow, flower, and then it kind of dies. And so you have to harvest the tubers and let them go through a period of dormancy, and then they'll sprout again. Sinningia pusilla is very common, and it has a number of named varieties or cultivars, which are often named for the places where they are found in the wild. But a lot of these are really cute, and they differ in size quite a bit, which makes them fun to grow. So Sinningia has thousands of hybrids, and they're categorized into some different groups. They are in a rainbow of colors. Of course, yellow I mentioned is kind of rare. Also, I would say green is extremely rare. I have never seen a green hybrid. There are a couple of green colored species, like including Brasiliensis, which I just showed you has a greenish color. So you probably won't find green ones, but I hope someone makes them soon. And then pure white flowers seem to be pretty rare as well for Sinningia hybrids. There are some species that have white flowers, including Cardinalis, which I showed you. I saw a white form of that the other day, which was really quite striking. But there are, if they are white, they usually have a pinkish hue to them. So that's something to watch for. I actually watch for white flowers because I think they would be fun to make crosses with. And I'm mentioning that here. One of the really cool things about Sinningias is that you can easily make crosses with them to make your own hybrids. And it's kind of fun, actually. If you germinate all the seeds, you'll end up with a gajillion plants and you won't know what to do with them. So you can do a few at a time and see kind of what happens and what you get, and maybe you'll like them and you can share them with other people. But what's cool about them is that they have a very short generation time. So you can actually produce 2 generations of these plants per year, which I see my colleague Ashley Morris in the audience. That means that these would be excellent research plants because you can do experiments with them. So here are some pictures of them, just kind of showing the size. This is Leucotricha, actually as a young plant, so it's still kind of small, but it's a standard, sort of standard size species. Here's a standard size Sinningia. These are what we call minis. And then compared to these, I wish they were on the same tray. I guess this plant is really one of the smallest, I would say, miniatures. This is Sim Salvium, which can sell for $100 a piece. They're kind of pricey sometimes. But that one in particular is pretty small, almost the size of what we call a micro miniature, which I'm showing here. This is Gloxinia. The common ones have a single row of petals. This is a doubled one that I have. There are also many other beautiful standard species. So this is a double one called Kevin Garnet that was made by a US hybridizer. Anne's Nix made by Vivian Liu. And this one actually can be fragrant as well, coming from that conspicuous parent that I told you smells like lemons. That's one of its parents. The plant that I have actually doesn't smell. A lot of times when you have hybrids that are made from fragrant species, the pathway for that chemistry gets jammed up. So your plant doesn't smell anymore. That's true of peonies. A lot of you probably grow those. A lot of the modern peonies don't have fragrance anymore, which is really unfortunate. Center heart also has a conspicuous parent. It smells like lemons. This is one of the first sort of standard size Sinningias that I had, Stone's Yulia. It's beautiful. You can see it will produce a lot of flowers. It's almost always in bloom. And depending on the temperature, with cooler temperatures, you get more intense colors. So this one was grown kind of early spring, winter in Michigan. And this one is here in Florida during the summer. And you can see it's less vibrant. So here are some minis, TL's Raspberry, and a beautiful red colored one from China, Autumn Love, Freya's Romance from Freya's Orchids and African Violets. This is a really good vendor. If you're looking for vendors, they ship from Taiwan though. This is Black Eruption, SRG's Black Eruption from Serge Saliba. You will see this name a lot, SRGs. There are a lot of hybrids, great hybrids made by this hybridizer. And then if you join any of the Facebook groups that I'm going to tell you about a little bit later, Dale Martins is really famous in our community for being an excellent hybridizer of a number of different kinds of gesneriads, and she's really generous with her knowledge, and she also does a lot of little experiments with plants which are really informative that help you grow them better. So she produces a lot of hybrids. These are 2 of them. Sim Infinity is a hybrid by Alex Meyer from Ukraine. These hybrids with the Sim name are very collectible and they're really extraordinary. I think they're really floriferous. They produce tons and tons of flowers and they're beautiful. They can sell for big prices sometimes though, so it's kind of tough to get your hands on them. And here's another one that has a little bit of yellow color, which I'm happy to see getting infused. YK's Jackfruit, which is another probably hybrid from China, I think. And then of course you can make your own. So here's one that I made very recently. I love it. It's a really bright orange color. A lot of orange colored flowers tend to fade to peach, or they're just not very orangey in general. This one actually is a pretty intense, I would say, true orange color, and it stays orange. So that's great. Lots and lots of micro miniatures to look at. And then of course, you've seen some of these already, but floral forms, you can have the basic floral form where you have a calyx, which are these green parts of the flower that really protect the flower and bud. And then the actual corolla, which is the petally type structures of the plant. And sometimes those sepal structures are converted into petal-like structures. In botany, we call those tepals. But so in one of the cases of double flowers, these sepals are becoming tepals. They become very showy, petal-like, and you have what looks like a double flower, but it's a calyx double. And then you have true double flowers, which actually have extra sets of petals. These often have reproductive issues because the petals are formed from usually stamens, the male parts of the flowers. So a lot of these double flowers might not have pollen anymore. And a lot of them also form deformed stigmas. So it can be difficult to make crosses with them. So getting started, I know I'm over time. If anyone has to go, I'm sorry, you can feel free to do so. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about how to grow these and how to get started. So I'll try to be quick. So the best way really is to join the Gesneriad Society. I did that when I was getting started. You'll get a welcome seed packet, which contains a mixture of seeds, which you can grow out. It gives you experience in learning the different kinds of gesneriads because it'll be a mixture of those and you'll have to figure out what they are. It also has a lot of other benefits, like you have access to a seed bank, which you can buy seeds to grow a lot of different kinds of Sinningias, and also a lot of different kinds of gesneriads pretty cheaply. They have master classes like this one on hybridizing, which is pretty good. I watched this and found information useful from that. And also you can network with other people and meet other people who grow these plants. And we often share and trade plants. If you're looking for something in particular or you have problems with your plants, there are people who will help you. And we also, a lot of those people are on these various Facebook groups like Gesneriad Nerds, Sinningia Haven, Micro Mini Sinningias, which specializes in the smallest of those plants. And also some hybridizing and trading groups. So those are things to check out. And then of course, when you're getting started with these plants, this is the most common question I hear. Where do we find these things? Like micro minis in particular are really hard to come by. I actually sell quite a lot of them on eBay. I started doing this because people wanted them, and also it helps me pay for all of the plants that I have to maintain. So it's actually kind of nice. And even during COVID, I've actually been able to hire some students or other people around town who didn't have jobs. And so it's been a great experience for me. I started a little nursery here on a part-time basis. So seeds, you can sow them on soil mixes. Sometimes I use coir because I like it, because it's not dirty. You can actually pull the seedlings out of it and easily. But you have to be careful with that because the pH is weird of coir, and which is coconut fiber, by the way, if some of you are not familiar with that. But it does hold moisture well, and you can use plastic containers like food containers. And I discovered, so this one is one from like a sushi to-go restaurant, but I also use like bulk food containers to germinate seeds. And here I have plant labels to make divisions, so I can sow different kinds of seeds with little labels in the same container. And I just have African violet soil mix in there. Also, I discovered this the other day. I was eating some Oreos, which I never eat, but someone gave them to me, so I had to eat them. I saw this and I was like, this is actually an incredible thing that you could use for germinating plant seeds, because it's got 3 lanes in it. So you could actually grow 3 different things in here and they stay separated and you don't have to worry about mixing them up. So once you have those, you're going to want to mist with some distilled water. Distilled water is better than tap water. And no fertilizer. If you put fertilizer on seedlings, you're going to grow algae and it's going to kill them. So don't do it. Don't do it. Also, you're going to want to place these in kind of dim light. If the light's too bright, the seedlings kind of get stressed because they don't really have great root structures yet, and they can kind of turn yellow. Heating mats that you can get for like seed germination trays in any big box stores are useful for encouraging or stimulating faster germination. So you can get germination within a week or two to months, it really depends on the species.
Can I ask a question, Grant?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Would you take the heating mat off after your seeds have germinated?
I would say that's a good idea because otherwise, well, depending on whether your thing is vented, it can also cause a lot of evaporation in the container. And you should actually check, even if your container looks like it's moist, sometimes all of the water has gone out of the soil and is now condensed on the lid. So be aware of that. You should still check them. You don't want to make them too soppy because you'll get fungus, but again, using distilled water helps for that. You can just mist the soil a little bit every now and then and it won't knock all your seedlings over.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you get mold, Lysol, hydrogen peroxide.
I've never bought Lysol. I'm going to have to start investing.
Well, when I learned about it, it was COVID and I couldn't get any. So now you can buy it, use it. It's great. It does work really well. Okay, so Sinningias like a little bit of disturbance. So if you start growing your seedlings, for instance, they're gonna kind of like plateau and not really grow very much. So if you pick them up carefully with tweezers and you place them back down in the soil again or transplant them in the same container, which is what my friend Dale Martins is showing here in this photo, you can actually stimulate them to grow really fast. Whereas if you don't move them at all, they will stay this size for a very long time. So don't be afraid to move them around. You don't want to probably pot them in pots at this point because they're too small and they won't do well. So you can keep them in a vented container like the one I showed you earlier, like this, or a taller bulk food container, and let them grow for a while till they get a little bit bigger, and then you can put them in pots. Okay. All right. So tubers. There are a lot of different ways you can do this. If a lot of vendors online, it makes me annoyed actually. I don't like it. A lot of vendors online tell you that you should plant your tubers right away. I say not so fast. One of the things that I really advise people to do, of course, I'm a botanist, so we always have hand lenses. It's something we use a lot, but you can order a 40x jeweler's hand lens that has an LED light in it. And this is super handy for a lot of different things, including inspecting your plants for bugs. But one of the things that I do with this is I look very carefully at my tubers when I get them, because sometimes they don't have any eyes at all. And I know that those tubers are probably not going to grow. People kind of doubt that, but I have thousands of these, as you can see on my kitchen counter. This is one small batch. And so I've noticed that if they don't have eyes, they're probably not going to grow eyes. So keep that in mind. But sometimes they have sprouts already. You can plant them right away. That's okay. The other thing I'm going to tell you should check for, and I don't know if anybody has ever noticed this before because I've never heard anyone say it, but you can actually see if this tuber has gray mold on it. And if it does, you don't want to plant that and put it in your collection because that mold is going to spread everywhere. So you probably need to clean your tubers with, sometimes I use dish soap and water and Physan, which is a chemical that you can buy, which is a virucide, bactericide, and fungicide, commonly used by horticulture folks. That is good for killing any mold that might be on there. You can also use hydrogen peroxide, like I told you before, that will kill mold. So you could treat those before you put them in another container. So I sprout tubers on moist vermiculite. A lot of other people use long fibered sphagnum that's shredded. And this is because it has antibacterial properties. People who propagate a lot of plants know that. So it's actually good because it has its own like antifungal, antibacterial properties. Just make sure you add some perlite to that so there's airspace. And you're going to keep these in like little condiment cups that you might get from restaurants, or you can buy these from Amazon for like nothing. And then you just put these under the lights and forget about them for a while. If your tuber is really healthy and it does have dormant bud tissue, which you could see with your hand lens, it will probably sprout within a week, to be perfectly honest. The stubborn ones, you might have to wait a month before they'll sprout. The super stubborn ones, I've had ones that have waited for a year. That takes up a lot of space, so maybe you don't have the patience for that. So sometimes starting with tubers is a difficult thing because I think some of the new people get frustrated because they can be challenging if they're not really good tubers that are ready to grow. Okay, if you start with plants, which I recommend, I actually sell plants, I don't sell tubers. I think it's great because you get instant gratification and you can start growing your plant right away. So like this is an example of one that I would sell. This is a micro miniature. The one thing that I will say about these is if you order plants from other people, same thing applies as to what I said earlier. Quarantine your plants, because if you get plants from someone, you have no idea the kinds of conditions they grow them in, whether or not they have insect problems. And if you bring that home, guess what? All your plants are going to have it. And probably before you notice. So make sure you quarantine plants. Do not put them directly into your collection. And if you're getting plants that are potted, a lot of vendors are really nice and they repot them for you before they come, which is nice. But again, I don't know what's under there. And I don't know if there are bugs in that soil. So I kind of like quarantine them and then I usually repot them so that I know it's the way that I do it and my plant will grow okay and that it won't infect my other plants. So that's something you can decide on your own, but that's something I would recommend. Okay, I'm gonna speed through this. So I started growing Sinningias because I had these terrariums and I like flowers, like most botanists, real botanists. I'm just kidding. So I joined the Gesneriad Society, started germinating seeds, and I grew Sinningias in terrariums by themselves. I eventually started growing them in pots. I built up a little collection. I used something simple at first. I used these plastic shoe boxes that I got at the store. And my plants grew really well. They were beautiful. This is what they looked like. So they did quite well in there. I didn't use anything special. I just watered my plants once a week. Once a month, I would water them with distilled water to wash out any fertilizers that might accumulate, which can burn plant roots. And then eventually, once I got a lot of plants, I started growing them under lights on these trays, but watering was a pain in the butt. So I switched to wick watering. I can tell you about that in a second. And of course, I started in my storage closet, but because I'm a total plant obsessed crazy person, I had to expand to this room that used to be a garage and now is my plant room. And I started out with this many plants and now I have this many.
Can I ask another question, Grant?
Yes.
I've heard a lot of recommendations to water with distilled water and also with baking and things like that, but I never use distilled water. I have well water. I don't have city water. And it's all filtered. So it seems to be okay. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I did 2 of my degrees actually at Michigan State, and we had the worst water. We called it liquid rock, full of calcium. You could see water spots even on our plastic pots. So in that case, it's fine to use that. We did use that to water plants, but again, like once a month, we would use reverse osmosis water. Distilled water is more easily accessible to us. And the purpose of that is because it's pure water, it washes away all the salts that accumulate. Oh. So you can use your regular well water all the time. Just beware, so some people may have water softeners. You don't want to use water softener water because the salt is really not good for the plants. But you know, if you buy like a gallon jug of distilled water at the supermarket or whatever, you can use that to water some of your plants. These little wash bottles, this is a scientific wash bottle, is really useful for watering most plants, like Sinningias, because you can see in this picture, a lot of the leaves hug the pot and it's hard. You don't want to get water on the leaves. Some people know that about African violets because it makes spots on them. So, and in general, it's never good to leave water on the leaves of your plants. You should always water underneath them because you can get fungal infections and other things. So these wash bottles are great. I put distilled water in these and I just water all of the plants quickly by hand and it flushes the salt out. Okay, did I answer your question? Probably more than you wanted. All right, and I'm very much over time. I apologize. So here is one of the most important things that you're probably going to want to know. Obviously, you can decide what is the best way for you to grow plants, but if you want to try wick watering, you can be really thrifty and creative about this. You don't need more expensive options like I use here. So in the bottom picture here, so be thrifty and creative. Use things that you have already. And one of the most important things with Sinningias is that you don't want to overpot them. So almost the majority of my plants are in these 2-inch pots, very tiny, right? The larger ones I upgrade to 2.5-inch pots. You don't even need to buy pots because you can actually use solo cups or like medicine cups, for instance. And there are holes in the bottom of these that you can run your wicks through. And it's exactly like using a pot. It's cheaper. So lots of folks use those. For wicks, there are a lot of different materials that you can use. Some people will recommend that you use mason twine. I have tried this. I've used it successfully, but in my experience, like in a very short time, it stops wicking and then you have a problem. What doesn't do that is acrylic yarn. So this is just regular acrylic yarn. This particular one is 4-ply. And you can see this little comment in the corner from Dale Martins. And these are her photos, by the way. She makes all these lovely informative photos for people. She says that you might want to use fewer of, you can untwist this basically and get fewer ply. So theoretically, you know, the way that water would move through an object like soil or through a yarn really shouldn't be affected by how big that yarn is. But I think she's right. In very tiny pots, this thicker yarn actually brings a lot of water into that pot. And some of the microbes, for instance, don't like to be really wet. They won't die, but they also just don't look very good. So you can use fewer plies, but basically you pre-soak these in some water. You can use a little bit of dish soap in there, or I use baby shampoo, which I also wash my dog with. But that works really well. And then you just bring it through the bottom of the pot. I really advise you to use some pre-soaked perlite in the bottom. It provides airspace. And it will keep your plants from rotting or your tubers from rotting. But you put the little bit of perlite, then you use African violet soil mix, which you can buy commercially or you can make your own. And perlite, mix them in equal parts. This provides a lot of airspace. If you're wicking a plant and you don't use that, your plant will rot. Warning. And also, I advise you to bake your soil in the oven or to microwave it for a little while. You can look up information on how to do that online, but it will keep the fungus gnats and other critters that live in your soil out of your plant room. And if you want to use those insecticide granules again, this second photo here is the place to do it. Make sure that you label your plants. For Sinningias, I like to cut plant labels actually to make smaller versions because they don't take up much space in the pots and the leaves have trouble growing around these anyway. So this is a little tip I'll give you. I don't see a lot of people that do that. In terms of reservoirs, you can see Dale here uses like again, food containers that you would get like soup in from a Chinese restaurant. You might get miso soup or something like that. In this, she drills a little hole in the top, and then she uses sandwich baggies and she puts the water inside of that. And that way she doesn't have to scrub every one of these containers because they will grow algae and stuff in them over time. I, of course, use those trays like I showed you earlier, and I actually put these in the dishwasher. So that's why this grid on top is really handy, because I can just lift the plants off and then wash the tray and I put it on another one. But again, that's a more expensive option that you don't have to do. If you want to grow plants in pots, for Carol, my neighbor who's here, they sell these at the Garden Gate Nursery across town. This pot costs like $4. It's amazing because it has a little terracotta lift out, and this is the reservoir where you keep your water. So a lot of my plants that you've seen in photos, I photographed them in these. I don't actually grow them, but I have friends who grow them in these, and you can do that. It's made for African violets, and they make them in all different sizes, shapes, and colors. So they're really pretty. So in the reservoir, you want to add fertilizer. All plants need fertilizer for nutrition. And if you're growing under lights, your plants will turn yellow super fast if you don't use it. If you use too much, your plants are going to burn. So they say for wick-watered plants, you should use 1/8 of a teaspoon, which is a very small amount, per gallon of water. And you want to choose fertilizers that don't have high phosphorus. So all fertilizers have these 3 numbers. It's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You can see here that this phosphorus level is much lower. A lot of orchid fertilizers have similar formulations, but you don't want to use a bloom fertilizer, in which case this number will be probably 14 or higher, just because it's not good for those plants. And there's a lot of research on this as well about why it's good or not good to use that. If you're growing plants under water or on trays over water, you will get algae. So, and this is something that I've really learned by trial and error. I've used a couple of different things in the trays, because if you don't put anything and you have fertilizer, you're going to get a lot of algae and it's going to stink like a dirty dog, and you're not going to like it.
Can I interrupt and ask another question?
Of course.
I warned you, but it wasn't about me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's up with that?
I know. So I always have cuttings around the house. Pieces of plant break off because of the animals or the kids, or I just cut them. And I'm constantly cleaning out the containers because they get full of algae. Can you put the hydrogen peroxide in the cutting water?
Yes, and so that's what I'm recommending here. So in my open trays, I put 2 tablespoons. It seems, I've experimented with this. If you put more, it doesn't make any difference. It's amazing. A lot of African violet growers use this. I had heard of it. I was using Physan, which is very expensive. And honestly, it gave me some like respiratory irritation that I didn't like, because I have so many plants, and that has a chemical like thing, and it also didn't work that well. So over in a week's time, I would still get really stinky water. I would have to change the water right away. With this, I get a lot. I still get algal growth, but it's very little. So you oftentimes don't see it in the tray, and it, my trays tend to evaporate in about a week's time anyways, because it gets pretty warm here. So I have to change the water in about a week. So it's been much cleaner and much nicer, and I really haven't had problems with algae. So hydrogen peroxide is an amazing tool, and it's not expensive, right? I think like you can get these for like 89 cents or something. Yeah. So just buy them don't order a gallon. I did this before. Don't order a gallon online, because it will cost a lot. Just, buy these simple ones from, the pharmacy or, big box store, and it's much cheaper. Keep your plants tidy. I already mentioned this. The other thing I'll say is a lot of Sinningias, I have some here actually. So a lot of Sinningias will bloom a lot, and you can kind of see where they're stopping to grow because the leaves at the top of the inflorescence kind of, well, they tend to grow, the flowers tend to grow out of the leaf axils. So when the leaves get smaller and smaller and smaller, you can really see that a terminal inflorescence is forming. And at that point, you know that the plant is probably going to stop blooming because it can't really grow anymore. So at that point, I usually cut. By that point, a lot of times the plants are already forming a new little plant down below. So I cut off the tops of my plants. I usually leave the bottom 2 leaves or so, just so the plant can still make a little bit of energy. But what happens is that the plant will quickly resprout, and often with multiple growth, so you'll get an even fuller plant, and it will flower again, probably within a month and a half. And that's how I keep my plants going all the time. If you let a plant flower all the way, there's a chance that it could go into dormancy, and breaking tuber dormancy is not easy sometimes. So I don't recommend that you let your plants bloom all the way out. Make sense? And also make duplicates of your favorite plants because, you know, stuff happens. You knock things over, you break them, your cat eats your plants. You know, bugs get through your window screens and eat everything. I once had a caterpillar that somehow got into my plant room. And the next morning, I woke up to an entire tray of plants just like this that were stubs. And there was a little fat caterpillar in the corner that was like passed out, like engorged because it ate every single one. Of course, they resprouted, but you know, sometimes you lose plants. And so it's also a good idea to share them with your friends because over time you can get plants back that you might have accidentally killed. I have people ask me for them all the time. So that's it. That's all I've got. Thank you. That was a very long presentation, but enjoy. I hope some of you will try to grow these plants. And if you want to know more about hybridization, which obviously I did not have time to talk about, I encourage you to look up other information about that through the Gesneriad Society, which is really great.
Thank you very much.
If any of you have a question, you can ask me as well now.
If you're muted, you can unmute so that you can ask questions.
Or you can type them in the chat if you don't want to.
Yes.
Let's stop sharing. So it doesn't look like anyone has any questions. I guess I explained everything.
I'll ask a question. Do you think that putting hydrogen peroxide kills the mycorrhizae in the soil?
Yes, I think that is a risk, right? Treating soil in general, even when you bake your soil, to start with a more sterile soil for germinating or propagating plants, you really are damaging the natural soil flora, and that could have an effect on your plant. But I think you really have to balance whether or not you need to do that, right? So should you be dumping hydrogen peroxide in your pots all the time? Probably not. But if you have a huge buildup of fungus that you can clearly see and you are concerned that it could attack your plant, then absolutely you should treat your soil with something. Do you have an alternative viewpoint?
No, I was just curious.
Yeah. So, oh, someone asked what my eBay ID is. I'll tell you. I have some plants on there right now. It is my last name and the first 2 letters of my first name. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to talk for a long time about these plants that control my life.
It was great. I think people normally talk for a couple of hours. And thank you so much for agreeing to speak for our group, the Crazy Obsessed Plant Addicts from Facebook. And I am Kay Perry. I didn't introduce myself in the beginning, so I apologize. And also Charmel Blackberry. She's on here too.
Hi, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Grant, so this was wonderful.
It was.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I hope to see all of you again on the group soon. I enjoy seeing all of your plant photos and growing scenarios. I always learn a lot, even though I'm a botanist and I know a lot about plants over the years. I always learn new things from how people do things where you are. So, yeah.
So for those of you that did miss it, we will be posting a replay. And I will also send that link to you, Grant, so you can send it out to people who are not on our group if they'd like to listen to the replay.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Grant.
Bye.
Take care. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.